So good morning again, everyone, and thank you very much for attending this session as part of the Brunel Research Festival, which is an almost a month-long event. The subject of discussion today is sustainable sport, and more specifically, we would like to explore the conceptual, pedagogical, and practical challenges to this concept. I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Karin Book from Malmö University in Sweden, and Mike Laughlin, who is the CEO of the Global Sustainable Sport in the UK, with huge experience in the field. So this is how we will proceed today. First, I will talk a little bit about some of the conceptual challenges facing the concept, which will then be followed by an exploration of some of the pedagogical challenges, and finally, Mike will tell us more about the background and the practical work involved in developing sustainable sport. So without further ado, let's make a start. So sustainable sport, very interesting concept, but I have to say very difficult to grasp and hotly debated. Back in 2005, Niels Faber and colleagues identified some 50 definitions of sustainable sport, but that was nearly 20 years ago, and you can imagine the proliferation of literature on the subject. I have to say that most definitions do agree more or less about some of the core meaning of sustainability, but then the challenges emerge when people start to apply this understanding to different fields, for example, education, biology, sport, transport, and other fields. Interestingly enough, sport or sustainable sport has also become an imperative and a norm in the field. And this effort was largely led by the leading international sport organization, the International Olympic Committee. They have developed a sustainability strategy. This strategy has been almost replicated by a number of international sport federations and other governing bodies, which revolves around three key areas. The first one is the organization, developing a sustainable organization, then developing sustainable events, in this case, the Olympic Games or international or world championships, and finally, developing a sustainable Olympic or sport movement. But again, this understanding of this strategy of sustainable sport development is still hotly debated. There are many challenges, many issues that haven't been resolved. But particularly with regards to events, it will be almost inconceivable today to think about an event which doesn't meet the requirements of sustainability in terms of climate protection, waste management, or water management. There is also an international standard, event sustainability standard established, and most event organizers, particularly big events, really strive and try to comply with the requirements of sustainable sport. Further to that, more than 300 sport organizations are now signatories to the United Nations Framework for Climate for Actions, which essentially commits those organizations to behave in a way that they will be able to meet a very high level targets, sustainability targets, which in turn means that they have to change, literally, they have to reconsider and change their strategies, their long-term strategies, their operational policies as well. At the same time, there is a lack of knowledge about the role of sport management studies in understanding and tackling sustainability. We know that sustainability is part of sport, of the teaching of sport, but we don't really have an idea to what extent and what particular aspects of sustainability have been introduced in the curricula in the higher education sector in particular. Further to this, we have an array of sustainable measuring tools and methodologies. There are literally hundreds of different measuring tools and methodologies for establishing different sustainability dimensions, which creates, of course, conceptual and practical challenges. Sport organizations, to the best of my knowledge, have not yet adopted any specific measuring tools. They are, in fact, I mean, if you look at the IOC and the World Athletics, for example, sustainable strategies, there are some indicators, some tools, but no coherent or consistent methodology does exist that can capture in a coherent way the sheer variety of sustainability aspects. We also have no clear understanding of how the teaching of sustainability and the implementation of sustainability strategy by sport organizations cohere. In other words, we have no clear understanding of how sport organizations, for example, both national and international, interpret and implement sustainability in their day-to-day work. And last but not least, we have no knowledge about the cost, the economic cost of implementing those sustainable development goals, because essentially sustainability, as it will become clear later in the presentation, concerns a change in the policies, the behavior of an organization, which inevitably would require resources, the investment of some sort of resources. Okay, with this in mind, then I would like to say a few words about the implementation of sustainability. And here I use an example from Cameron Allen and colleagues who studied the implementation of different sustainable strategies, not related to sport, just different sustainability strategies in 26 different countries. And what you see on the screen is the results of their study. And the red color in the figures indicates the lack of implementation. So as you can see, there is a lack of understanding and implementation of sustainable sport across a number of important areas. Most importantly, a systematic approach to sustainability, which is absolutely critical. Lack of specific initiatives, lack of specific indicators and understanding. On the left-hand side of the figure, you can see there's some success in the initial stages of implementing sustainable development, which was essentially concerning the environmental dimensions. But later on, when it became clear that sustainability is not just about the environment, then it has become increasingly difficult for firms and organizations to implement sustainable strategies. And again, this is data from across 26 different countries. So fairly compelling case telling us that our knowledge, our understanding of sustainability and its implementation is still in its infancy, despite 20-odd years of discussions and debate on the subject. When we consider sustainability in relation to sport, it's important to understand what are the main ontologies or viewpoints about sustainability and their relationship to sustainable development goals. And there are clearly four such ontologies that directly apply to sport. The first one, of course, is the human dimension ontology, which is concerned with developing people, ensuring good health and well-being, gender equality, and obviously partnerships for goals. These are directly the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that correspond to the human ontology of sustainability. The second ontology concerns society, and some fundamental issues such as no poverty, zero hunger, or quality education. Interestingly enough, if one looks at the IOC's sustainability strategy, this strategy commits the IOC to 12 of the 17 United Nations sustainability goals, but the elimination of poverty and quality education is, interestingly enough, not one of them. I personally find this rather strange. The third ontology underpinning sustainability concerns the economics, which is absolutely fundamental. Issues and related sustainability goals such as decent work and economic growth, industry innovation, infrastructure, reducing inequalities, and so on. There are several sustainable development goals corresponding directly to this ontology. And finally, of course, we have the four-dimensional ontology of sustainability with direct relevance to sport, which includes clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, and climate action. I've already mentioned that 300 plus organizations, sport organizations, have signed up to the United Nations Climate Action Framework. So this is an important consideration to understand the role of sport in addressing the sustainable development goals. Now, so far so good, but the key question we need to ask about sustainability is the sustainability of what? And I'm afraid that we haven't really arrived at a clear answer to this question so far in the field of sport, and not just in the field of sport. And this is the fundamental question, what? Because what is critical, what concerns an artifact? Sustainability essentially is it can be interpreted as a property that is an attribute of an artifact. So in other words, sustainability describes something which does exist out there. This is the first important consideration. Sustainability, and the key question we need to answer, and I'll try to provide some answers to this question in a minute. Secondly, and very important, is the fact that sustainability implies a relationship between this artifact and the environment within which this artifact exists. So sport exists, we say sport, but what do we mean by sport? Do we talk about a sport organization, or competition structure, or governance dimensions? Sport as a system exists within a society and also within this global environment where there are global institutions and relationships. So it is important to understand this relationship between the artifact and the environment. And an essential characteristic of this relationship is the strive for equilibrium. In other words, this artifact, in our case, sport, always aspire or tries to exist in equilibrium with the environment, the external environment. In other words, if, for example, there will be changes of the external environment, then sport has to adjust accordingly in order to maintain this equilibrium. And this is so because sport sustainability explicitly concerns artificial or human-made systems. In nature, this relationship is natural. In biological systems, they exist in equilibrium, and if this equilibrium is somehow violated, they will immediately take measures to adapt and to adjust. So we need to understand that sport is an artificial and human creation, essentially. Modern sports in particular, they have no analog, if you like, in the daily life of people. Take gymnastics, or I mean, apart from running, obviously, which is the most natural activity, and swimming, perhaps, most of the other sports are just human creation, particularly their modern versions, not necessarily traditional sports. So these are important considerations. And if we apply this framework, this understanding of sustainability, first as an artifact, second as the relationship between the artifact and the environment, and finally as an artificial system which aspires to equilibrium, this is what we arrive at. So the first consideration, sport as an artifact, tells us that we need to understand what is this within sport we're talking about. So and for example, we can talk about sport organizations, different sport organizations, some of which do have physical presence. For example, they may have a building, a facility, so that they represent concrete physical artifacts. But governance structure, they only exist on paper. Or we can talk about the competition structures, different competition structures, national and international, or the members and the staff, the number of staff, or the facilities. And probably the key characteristics that define modern sport is the sport as a performance system, sport which is oriented towards the records. Modern sport, and elite sport in particular, is all about that. It's about performance and competition. So the question then becomes, what is this we would like to sustain? Shall we aspire to sustain the existing sport organizations as they are, or shall we perhaps aspire to sustain the existing governance structures? We all know that we're not happy with some of those structures, particularly the gender balance within governance structures, but also the way they handled the affairs of different organizations, or maybe the competition structures. I mean, these are all very pertinent questions. The second dimension of sustainability as a relationship between the artifact and the environment means that we can have different goal orientations. So the first goal orientation is called absolute because it represents an ideal state whereby we say these are the sustainability targets that our organization must meet. Or we may take a relative stance and say, let's start with here and now and see what we have and what is this we can do, maybe in not all aspects of sustainability, particularly if we take the 17 different sustainable development goals, but maybe in some of these aspects. And the final dimension of this relationships is the behavioral interactions. So as I mentioned, sport as a system tries to exist in equilibrium with its environment. So it is in a constant interactions and relationship with this environment. So the question becomes whether this relationship or interaction is static or dynamic. So static means that, for example, the environment doesn't change. Okay, sport exists within an environment which doesn't change, which in fact is difficult to imagine because the external environment of sport changes all the time in terms of different policies, economic situation of different countries or globally, changes in the international competition structures and so on. So again, we need to specify, we need to be clear what type of interactions we're dealing with and whether we consider changes in the environment, changes, for example, in the sport as a system or an organization, whereby at the same time the environment remains static, or vice versa, when the environment changes, or sport organizations try to stay the same. So these are important considerations to bear in mind. So that's pretty much the essence of what I wanted to communicate. Just to sum it up again, sustainability has become really an important topic in the field of sport. The major sport organizations have demonstrated some leadership in this regard, not only at the international level, but also at the national level. And this is particularly the case in the UK, but also in other countries. At the same time, a great deal of uncertainty persists in relation to how we conceptualize, understand, and interpret sustainable sport. And I should have mentioned this probably at the beginning, but this presentation is part of, almost partly stimulated by a research project we recently starting working on, a consortium of partners from 6 European countries. This is a European Union funded project within the Erasmus Plus framework. And these are the sort of questions that the project is going to tackle over the next couple of years. Thank you very much for your attention. And I would welcome any questions or comments. In the meantime, I'll stop sharing my screen to allow Karin to deliver her presentation.
Should I open up my presentation right away?
Sure.
Or yeah,
sure. Yeah, you can.
and I do think there might be There are some overlaps, and also I think there are things to discuss when we have heard maybe all three presentations. Should I start, or? Was that a yes? I don't know. Can you nod? Okay, I'll start. Yes, thank you. So, thank you for inviting me. My name is Karin Bok, and I work as Associate Professor at the Department of Sports Sciences at Malmö University. And I'm going to continue where, there will be some overlaps from Vasil's presentation, but I will then move on to talk about teaching sport management in the light of sustainable development. And as I said, I come from Malmö University. Malmö is located in the very south of Sweden, which you might know, close to Copenhagen in Denmark. Malmö University is a young university, only 25 years old. And the sports science department at Malmö University is a social science department. And I'm not going to talk about the project that Vasil highlighted, but here you see a slide showing that project, Erasmus Plus project about sustainable sport management. And in 1 year's time, we will be able to report on hopefully some very interesting results on how sustainability is taught and implemented by higher education institutions and sport organizations. So when I teach sustainable development, whether it's within our sports science or sport management program or in other programs, I always start by discussing, of course, the meaning of the concept. And usually I use a number of milestones to show the development of the concept, starting with the report Our Common Future in 1987 with a very famous quote, I think still the most used quote when it comes to defining sustainable development. And then I move on to talk about the conference in Rio in 1992, when the 3 pillars or 3 areas of sustainable development was highlighted and elaborated on. And the outcome of that conference was a number of illustrations showing the 3 different aspects: environmental, social, and economic. I think you recognize the pictures. Then I move on to talk about the development of the Millennium Development Goals running until 2015, and then the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. As you all recognize, the 17 goals. And there are a number of illustrations showing the complexity of the sustainable development concept. I like the one at the bottom here, which integrates the 17 goals and the 3 different pillars or aspects of sustainability. And also, as Vasil highlighted, it is a very complex concept with different interpretations of what is to be sustained, such as nature, life support, or the community, what is to be developed, people, the economy, or society, and the time and measurement aspect of it. And the vagueness, or the concept being so wide, has gained some critique. Well, it's vague, contains a lot of different aspects, which could make it a bit uncommittal. And as it's so broad and pretty vague, how do you develop efficient and measurable strategies and criteria based on those overall aims? And how do you balance the different criteria? Is the environment a little bit more important than the economy, etc.? And also then you have the perspective of the different perspectives that could be used. Whose perspective is used? Business perspective, Mother Nature's perspective, sport organizations perspective, communities perspective, etc. It differs. And finally, also the perception of the concept could be a bit problematic. When I teach sustainable development courses, I start by asking the students what they thought when they realized there is a sustainability course in their sports science or sport management program. And then one student usually starts by saying, well, I didn't understand the meaning of it. I'm going to deal with sport management. Why am I going to take a sustainable development course? And then people start to admit that I thought it was boring and unnecessary, etc. So I think there is a negative connotation to the concept of sustainable development, which is a bit problematic. Probably because people tend to think about commitments. I have to sort my waste, I have to do this and that, and I'm not allowed to fly, I'm not allowed to buy certain things, etc. And that gives it a negative connotation. So when I teach sustainable development courses, I think, especially when it comes to in relation to sport, I really try to focus on the opportunities of the concept, try to turn it around. Well, it is about some restrictions, but it's also about improving processes, improving the way we do things, and it's about development. So focus on the development part of the concept, and to develop something that requires creativity, innovative solutions, and that's not boring. And it requires a holistic perspective, which I think is very interesting to have in educational programs. Also, cooperation is a necessity within sustainable development, and cooperation, I think that's a buzzword in many disciplines today. And if you're successful, you do have marketing and CSR opportunities. And at the end, it also comes down to a necessity. It's not optional any longer to deal with sustainable development. It is a necessity. And I think it is about being aware of the problems to be able to decrease negative impacts and develop positive. So let's add sport to sustainable development. And I think this is, well, a bit similar to the things Vasil talked about. Usually this is where I start when I teach courses in sport management in relation to sustainable development. In the middle, you have a sport phenomenon. It could be the operations of a sport club, it could be a sport event, a sport venue, or sport activities, etc., which have positive and negative effects on society, social, economic effects, etc. And it also has some both positive and negative effects on the ecosystem. So it's about being aware of both the positive and negative effects. And actually, it's about developing knowledge and awareness of and strategies for minimizing the negative impacts of sport linked to both material use, use of natural resources, social exclusion, etc. But also developing the positive side of it, using sport as a tool and as a facilitator for positive change to create positive effects on individuals, society, and ecosystems. And actually, if you look around globally or internationally, you see that a lot has happened during the last decades. It's on the move forward, and the awareness has definitely increased. So there are a lot of good examples out there, at least on the central level, but to make it trickle down to the everyday practice, that might sometimes be a bit difficult. And also, if you look at the Swedish perspective, as I work in Sweden, but I think that's applicable also to other countries, sport organizations, especially the sports movement, they're very used to dealing with social aspects in connection to sport, both positive and negative. They are also forced to deal with economic aspects. In Sweden, sport is becoming more and more commercialized. However, when it comes to environmental aspects, I would say that it's still quite immature. it has started to develop, but so far at quite a low level. And there are, of course, also differences between different sports sectors. And I'd like to say a few words about a study that I, together with some colleagues, conducted a few months ago. It was an interview study which resulted in a book chapter, which will be published in the book Management of Sport Organizations at a Crossroads of Responsibility and Sustainability, Perceptions, Practices and Prospects around the world. So it's chapters showing examples from different nations. And we were responsible for the Swedish examples. And we conducted interviews with 3 representatives in leading positions within public sector, commercial sector, and non-profit sector. Public sector was represented by a person, a head at the leisure department in the city of Malmö. The leisure department has the responsibility for providing sport facilities, support to sport clubs, and community leisure opportunities. Commercial sector was represented by the football club Malmö FF, which is the most wealthy club in Sweden. It's not wealthy compared to British clubs, etc., but in a Swedish perspective, commercial club. And then we have the non-profit sector represented by the Skåne Sport Federation, which is the regional sport federation gathering the non-profit sport clubs in the region. And I just want to say also that voluntary organized sport is the cornerstone of Swedish sport and have a very important social role. If you look at, well, all 3 interviews, they were really, really knowledgeable about sustainable development, and they referred to the Sustainable Development Goals, and they pointed out how their organizations actually were well aware of those goals. However, there were also a lot of both opportunities, but maybe mainly obstacles when it came to dealing with sustainability within their organization. The leisure department highlighted that they had a clear emphasis on social aspects. We mainly deal with social values, inclusion, participation, and democratic issues. We are working hard with listening to the residents and inviting grassroots initiatives. I would like to say that Malmö is one of the best cities in Sweden when it comes to developing grassroots initiatives, mainly with a social focus. However, they realized that the environmental issues are not always handled properly, and therefore they have developed and started to implement an environmental management system so that environmental considerations will henceforward be included in all processes and actions. However, there are several obstacles. One of the obstacles is the municipal jungle of political decisions and responsibilities. It's really difficult to handle all the responsibilities. And also they highlight that conflicts in everyday practices sometimes arise. The provision of leisure activities and facilities could go against economic and environmental ambitions. I think we all recognize that problem. The overall goal for the municipality, which clearly states that sustainable development goals should be included, do not always trickle down to the practical reality. If we move on to the commercial club, there are probably more opportunities and incentives within the commercial club than the public sector. There are clear obligations and expectations. Being a well-known and wealthy club in Sweden, it is important to be a responsible actor in the city, and they do cooperate quite a lot with the municipality. And also they talk quite a lot about the expectations from the market. And to attract sponsors and partners, social projects have been very powerful, they state. So once again, social projects are highlighted. They own their own stadium, which is not always the case in Sweden, and that means having the power to make sustainable improvements. And as it's quite a big and wealthy club, they do have a lot of employees, and they have special people employed to deal with sustainability issues, which is quite unusual in Sweden. But they have the right competences. As obstacle, they highlight all the uncertainties, short-term versus long-term effects, not having power over the whole production chain, and not having power over the transport behavior of stage and visitors, fast changes, etc. And also the CEO of the club highlights that it's hard to figure out what is actually the most sustainable. So it's a lack of knowledge. And finally, the representative for the non-profit sport movement, they really highlight that the non-profit sport movement in Sweden, or in other nations as well, is a huge force involving a lot of people. So it could have a great power to make changes. And also strategies have started to be implemented at the national level. We have our first sustainability strategies at the Swedish Sports Confederation level. So that's the first step. However, there are several obstacles standing in the way for implementation. The sport clubs have a great deal of self-determination. There is a great gap between national level and local level. Goals and policies are formulated at the national level, while the practical work is carried out at the local grassroots level. And the strategies, both the SDGs, but also the more sport-focused strategies, they contain a lot of vague formulations and how to make them concrete and adopted to the organization in question, adopted to different sports, contexts, etc. Most people dealing with the operations in the sport clubs are volunteers, unpaid. And what could you actually require from those persons? And this is very, very important, highlighted by most sport clubs, that sustainability is not one of our core activities. We just want to play sports. There is a lack of resources out in the sport clubs in terms of interest, time, money, and knowledge. It's not required from the sport clubs in Sweden. They gain a lot of financial support, but the support systems are not linked to sustainability performance indicators. So no pressure. And this, I think, is important as well. I would like to say that sport organizations, they are quite traditional, and there is a resistance against changes. So while there are a lot of obstacles and lack of knowledge when it comes to sustainability out there, and more knowledge is actually requested, there is a need for increased knowledge and competence regarding sustainability issues within sport-related organizations. And there is a need for understanding and handling the different contexts in different sectors, as there are clearly differences between commercial and non-profit sector. And there is a need for knowledge and competence for managing and solving complex tasks in relation to sustainable development. And there seem to be some prerequisites for successful sustainability work if you look at sport organizations. One is comprehensibility, and that requires knowledge, awareness, understanding. There is another one is manageability. You need to have the right tools to be able to deal with it. And meaningfulness. If you don't understand why it's important, it's quite hard to deal with it. And I think those aspects has to be taken into consideration when educating sport management students in sustainable development. Finally, we move on to that part. So here I've included Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, because when teaching sustainable development issues in connection to, for instance, sport management, you need to think about how to handle different type of skills, because as we have, both me and Vessel has stated, it's a very complex theme, sustainable development, and you need to have complex skills. And according to this taxonomy, you have the more basic skills at the bottom here to actually understand the concept, to be able to apply it on certain phenomena. And then you move up to be able to analyze evaluate, and at the top you have to actually create something, create a change, create a program, create a design, a process, etc. This is another way of illustrating it with the basic skills at the bottom and the more higher order skills, critical thinking skills at the top: analyze, evaluate, and create. In relation to this, I also like to highlight some competencies highlighted in an article by Annelien and Boström, an assessment of key sustainability competencies, and they have been inspired by the UNESCO report, Education for Sustainable Development, where they highlight a number of competencies to be able to deal with sustainability. And in the middle, we find integrated problem solving. That's the key competence to actually handle sustainability. And connected to that, you have system thinking, holistic perspective, future thinking, to be able to broadcast future problems, strategic thinking to solve problems, implementational thinking. This is also a way of implementing, doing it in a practical way. And then you have values, norms, moral aspects, intrapersonal aspects to actually reflect about yourself, and interpersonal aspects, which has to do with collaboration. So it is definitely complex to teach sustainability or sustainable development in any sector, but, well, for instance, within sport management. I've included one example. At Malmö University, we include sustainable development throughout our sport management or sport science program, but not to a very large extent. But we do have one specific course devoted to sustainable development, sport physical activity and sustainable development, which I don't think is enough. But if you look at the learning outcomes of this course, which is in the fourth semester of this bachelor program, the first learning outcome is about identifying global challenges regarding health development and the environment. And I would like to say that refers to understanding and applying mainly, maybe a little bit of analyzing as well if you look at Bloom's taxonomy. The second one is about highlighting, discuss relevant examples of health work carried out within international bodies. That is once again about understanding, applying, but I would also say it's about analyzing. Explain, and the third outcome here, explain and the meaning and possible applications, here we have applying, of course, of the concept of sustainable development. And the fourth one is the most complex one. Identify, review, and evaluate a concrete case with a focus on health, physical activity, and sports using adequate theories and concepts based on a sustainability and ethical perspective. It requires definitely analyzing, evaluating, and actually it doesn't say here, but the assessment also requires coming up with some suggestions, some solutions to the problems identified. And actually, if you are going to deal with sustainable development in higher education programs, in, for instance, sport management, there are a number of things you need to consider. Is sustainable development part of a broader strategy at the department, faculty, or university? Well, how does that have to be reflected in the curricula, for instance? Which of the UN Sustainable Development Goals should be addressed in the program's curricula? Hopefully all of them, but at least a majority of them. How could sustainability be covered in your program? In specific courses, like the one I showed you, or integrated into several courses, or a combination, which I think is preferred. to what extent could different sport management topics like administration, project or event management, etc., in your curricula of the programs, courses, modules be informed by sustainability? How could a concept of sustainability be delivered in courses and modules? It should be reflected probably in the course aim, learning outcomes, but also in learning activities like lectures, seminars, workshops, practical exercises, maybe being out doing internships with a sustainability focus. And of course, also in the assessments. And the course I just showed you, we work with a lot of different learning activities in order to highlight, to inspire the student in different ways. What sustainability competences are the students expected to gain at the end of the course? You recognize the words from Bloom's taxonomy. And finally, which external institutions should be consulted when developing your curriculum on sustainability? As I showed you before, there are a lot of problems, obstacles, challenges in different type of organizations. And these problems, of course, needs to be taken into consideration when developing the courses. And as I stated previously, we are now working on this Erasmus Plus project. So hopefully within a year, we will be able to get back to you and report on some of the results. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Karen. Very interesting. And before I forget, can you send me the reference of Boostram?
Yes.
Yeah, once you finished. Lovely. Thanks very much again. And Mike, I guess over to you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was on mute there. So just to say thank you, Vasil. Thank you, Karen, for that. I will try to share my screen. Hang on 2 seconds. Can you see my screen now? Yeah, good. Okay. So, well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this. Obviously, my background is slightly different. So I'm going to talk about this project that we've launched recently, which is something I've been working on for about a year now, called Champions of Sustainability. Just to give you a little bit of background, my background's really international sport. I've worked for a number of international sports federations. My background is also data and technology. So I was a technology consultant to 5 international sports federations, and then worked closely with ASOIF and the IOC on a data project from kind of 2011 onwards. But in the early 90s, I formed a company called Sportcal, which was focused very much on kind of the business of sport. So we created an online platform for sports market intelligence, looking at really sort of media rights and sponsorship deals, and more latterly event bidding. And really where my kind of sustainability area started was looking at impact studies and the impact of major sports events on host cities and host governments. So I created a kind of framework for understanding the value of sports events to host cities and governments. And then I left that organization at the start of 2019, and then formed this current company in the early part of 2022 to really look at sustainability. And I've been kind of studying this area for a period of time, and my sort of starting point was really to think about the structure of the sports industry. Really, as I say, I've worked mostly at the sort of governing bodies level of sport. But as you can see, my sort of brief analysis and estimation of the industry is that there's probably around 400,000 organizations in and around the sports industry as a minimum. And so, as an industry itself, it's quite sizable and has considerable reach, but it's actually the fact that we can probably reach around about 1 billion participants who are actively doing something in sport, and probably 4 to 5 billion sports fans, that creates an interesting area for sport, that not only should sport become more sustainable, but it should really help to communicate and promote sustainability to its participants and its fans. And so I've been kind of building information and knowledge around this area and trying to understand who's been doing what in international sport and sustainability. And that has kind of led me to creating this platform called Global Sustainable Sport for two reasons, really. One is I found it very hard to understand what people were doing in sustainability. And I thought it was interesting if we could create a central platform where we could showcase some of the things that are happening in this area, partly to sort of help with educating and knowledge sharing. And secondly, I found that there was a very poor knowledge, as you both described, around what sustainability really means in a sporting context, and how we can measure and sort of reference what is happening in sustainability. So this project, Champions of Sustainability, is really a project to kind of look out to the broader industry and say, what are you doing? Where are you on your sustainability journey? Using a survey. And we're trying to develop this survey as a global survey, but actually really using it almost in a local way by going country by country or sport by sport. So we're trying to sort of break down the idea that we're doing this very large survey, but actually working with different partners in different countries and different sports organizations to say, where's your industry in sustainability? How many people are active? And give us a view on what they're doing. And the aim, I decided, was trying to think about how do we encourage, how do we make it kind of aspirational for people to get involved with sustainability. And so I thought about where you are on your journey. So I've created this kind of, how do we all become champions of sustainability, either as individuals or as organizations or as events, so that we can, really be inclusive. So champions, we can all become champions, and kind of encourage people along their journey. And the question, of course, is how do you assess sustainability? And as you've both alluded to, there's a whole myriad of different ways in which events and organizations are being assessed, either through the SDGs or through the ISO certification programs, or if you're looking at more financial modeling programs, you've got the financial materiality, the impact materiality reporting. I know a number of international bodies and national bodies who are using GRI, but there is no model that really covers everything that sport does. And I really don't believe that the SDGs actually represent what sport does very well. So I think there are a number of gaps that are not covered that kind of really work to sport's strengths. And traditionally, sport has kind of focused on economic impact as a sort of way to describe the benefit of sports events, or we have media coverage. So a lot of people are focused on what I call profile and profit. And we are now starting to see people like UEFA doing social return on investment studies. And obviously we are increasingly seeing people reporting on their carbon footprint and developing their environmental programs. But there's nothing really that brings the sort of sporting structure together, and how to describe the, what I call the true value of sport. And so I came up with this idea of creating the sustainable pillars of sport. I've created 7 pillars. I've tried to sort of ensure that different frameworks are all covered by the different elements of what we're talking about. It may not be final and precise, but I try to use the work that I've been doing over the last sort of 10-15 years around the impact of sport to create something that I thought people could relate to, and to try to sort of encapsulate most elements that I think we talk about. And obviously one of the key aspects of this project is to try and engage with academic research and academic strength in looking at what are these different aspects, how do we define them, and building out a model that enables us to sort of really explain and capture the value of sport and what the outcomes are that we're expecting from sport. So as I say, we're planning to put out this survey at the end of June. We've built the framework of it. We're currently working with the University of Oregon, with some MBA students and some academics in Oregon to kind of sense check what we're doing at this stage. But we're really have a number of other people that we've been working with, practitioners, and other academics to look at different areas of this, and obviously it would be wonderful to connect with yourselves in the projects that you're doing, because I think there's an awful lot of crossover, and to really sort of build out this survey so we can begin to build a map of who is doing what in sustainability and where. And the idea in principle is by promoting best practice, by identifying people who are actively promoting sustainability, we will hope to encourage more and more sports organizations. We at the current time probably have identified around about 800 to 900 organizations that are doing something in sustainability, and I suspect that we haven't covered everybody by any stretch of the imagination. But at what stage are they at? And what we're finding is that there's very, very few who are what I call quite advanced in their sustainability programs. So even this map of where I'm showing you a few hundred organizations, these are ones that are slightly more advanced, but I think that we have a long way to go. So the program aims to try and help people transition from what I call the planning stage, so the early stages of trying to understand what sustainability is, and certainly, as you've both said earlier, there's a huge confusion about what sustainability really is in the industry, and how do we progress through these various stages of development to becoming champions, to being really at the forefront of sustainability. And I talked to quite a lot of people about this. I've talked to a number of practitioners, and actually even those who are quite advanced in their programs actually liked the idea of having a program that helps them, guide them, and provide some educational support to them in their progress. And so this is kind of the thinking behind it, is that we combine education, data, frameworks, information, all into kind of a program that helps sports organizations transition to this point of becoming a champion of sustainability. And obviously this is the initial concept for this year, but we see this as a sort of probably a 5 to 10 year program to help people go through these various stages. And so the first stage, we're going to run a global survey, do a preliminary evaluation on that survey, and then do sort of interim surveys. And the idea is that the global survey will be what I call quite high level, so not really detailed. And then we gradually build out towards the end of the year, where we will do a sort of much more in-depth analysis on organizations who want to join the program and move to this sort of point where they are transitioning to become a champion. And we will do a report and awards program to support that. And the awards program, we hope to have it very diverse. So it could be for individuals, it could be for academic research, it could be for events, and of course it could be for sports organizations, suppliers, host cities, a whole range of different organizations. And the idea is to encourage people to adopt sustainable practices, sustainable programs, and to help them on their journey through that process. And at the end of the year, we will try to sort of produce a variety of reports on sustainability and sport. And these will be, a global report, and we're now talking to various countries, regions, and sports about developing individual reports on those areas. So, for instance, we're talking to a group in Finland and a group in India. We're talking to some groups in Africa and now in Oceania and the Pacific about developing sort of sub-projects in those countries and in those regions to develop more detailed reports which will connect into the kind of the global report. And then we are also talking to these groups about creating national programs. So connecting not only the research, the frameworks, the education, but also helping to develop other projects to support groups in those regions. And so some of these are social programs, some of these are environmental programs, but helping different stakeholders in different areas to support different projects. So we have one in Africa and one in India at the moment, where we will be kind of supporting their programs through different things and different initiatives that we're doing. Yes, so this is really sort of the thinking, is to have an awards program connected around activities in sustainability, recognizing sort of people's good efforts, and then workshops. We've already run one of these earlier in April. The plan is to have a number of different workshops. So we had a mixture of sort of academics, we had practitioners, cities, governments, a whole range of consultants, and some athletes talking in different workshops about their experiences in sustainability and what they're doing. So sharing best practice. And then we're talking to some practitioners who work in sport and education to give an online educational program. So yes, there's a variety of different initiatives really that we're developing, and the aim is to try and bring partners onto the program to support our activities and to develop from there. So that's pretty much the sort of summary of my presentation.
Lovely, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. Needless to say, we will be happy to share some of our findings with you, so you can further disseminate through your networks the findings of our project, particularly on the educational front.